Left-hand side of the train, you'll see an old smart track with a bunch of retired railroad equipment. So everything that we are operating here today, minus that green diesel switching engine we are passing by, and the black General Electric number 402, which will be at the bottom of that track, are bought by us from the West Side Lumber Company of Tuolumne, a city located about 100 miles north of us. The West Side Lumber Company was the last logging operation here in California to run a steam power train. And when they shut down their operations in the early 1960s, we went up there, did on all their equipment, and then brought it down here and laid their tracks on one of the oldest railbeds that still exists today that the sugar pine company used. So most of you guys probably traveled up to 41 North today to come visit us, and you noticed on the other side of our freeway that we had a significant burn scar. That because in 2017 we had a wildfire ratio here called a railroad fire due to its proximity to us. That fire started off across the freeway, made a run up towards Tenaya Lodge, where it jumped the highway, made a U-turn, and continued to burn this whole mountainside opposite of us, making a run for the town of Oakhurst, located about 20 miles south of us. This fire burned for over 3 weeks and took out over 12,000 acres of forest around us. Speaking of that forest surrounding us, we do have 5 primary types of trees with us today. But first we're made of California black oak that is on either side of our tracks, that has that stark white appearance from having all the bark burned off it, that grows in every single shape and twist and turn that you can imagine. Rather than these pine trees that grow straight up and down like matchsticks. Our California black oak was not primarily logged or lumber because, as you see, you will not get many straight birds out of this wood. It was instead utilized as firewood. California black oak is an extremely hard wood and it burns very hot and for a very long time, making it the perfect firewood for powering the 5 locomotives. Secondly, on either side of our tracks, we will have our incense heaters, easily recognizable by their almost reddish-looking bark that grows straight up and down in strips rather than scale-like form with these other pine trees. The incense heaters was prized for their smell because when shot down, they will retain their smell for years to come, making them naturally rust-resistant and immune to rot. Chinese labor force using nothing but picks, shovels, and wheelbarrows. It took them roughly 3 months to dig this curve out to be able to fit the train through. And if you want to get a general idea of just how much work was involved in this project, everything that they moved is still piled to this day on the inside of our tracks. That gives us these huge mounds of dirt in this one section. If you guys pull out your postcards you received this afternoon, one of your postcards you received is of this actual turn in the early 1900s. So you'll be able to see the train stretching through here and none of this underbrush, so you can just see how much earth was moved in this project. And if you do my long cars up in the front, you're going to be able to get my first glimpses of them. So if you look out to the right-hand side of the train towards that mountain that was being broken, if you look high up into these pine trees to the very ends of the branches, you will see these large cones hanging from the ends of the branches, looking almost like Christmas tree ornaments. Those pine cones that you guys will be seeing are the sugar pine cones. between 16 to 28 inches in length and can weigh up to 4.5 pounds while bringing it full of sap and eating in the trees. So the reason that these lumberjacks gave these trees the name the sugar pine trees is because when you cut into this tree, it releases a vast amount of clear, thick sap that when it comes in contact with our air, hardens and becomes almost the same structure as crystallized sugar and raw candy. Though I would not suggest eating it because I do not know if it's all that edible. And then lastly, we are going to be popping up on our ponderosa trees. They are easily recognizable by their scale-like bark that is always tan brown-like in color. Ponderosa trees are easily recognizable by their pine needles since they grow the largest pine needles out here in the forest, between 8 to 10 inches in length. These ponderosa trees also have a bark that is said when peeled off gives off the smell of fresh vanilla and butterscotch. This railroad that we're operating on today was utilized from the Sugar Pine Company from 1908 to 1925, making this path in the forest over 100 years old this year. The road bed that is directly below us was in fact the last rail bed that the Sugar Pine Company used, utilized from 1927 until their close in 1931. That rail bed, along with all of our other abandoned rail beds throughout the Sierra National Forest, have been picked up and converted into either U.S. forests or seasonal access roads, giving our firefighter and tourists easy access to these more remote parts of the forest. Number 15 that we operate here today, the engine that is pulling our train, was built in 1913, making her 112 years old this year. She weighs in at roughly 54 tons, and she was built for power rather than speed. That is why she has those side-mounted pistons on the side of her train, rather than being horizontally mounted underneath each axle. The reason why those pistons are side-mounted is because it allows the train, even if it is facing forward or backwards, it will still be able to pull the train going the same speed at pulling the same amount of weight, because every wheel under there is independently driven because of those pistons. The number 15 here today also does not burn wood or coal in the conventional sense to keep its fire going, but instead utilizes recycled motor oil today. The number 15 was built to burn crude bunker type C oil, but that is a lot harder to come by. In a full round trip, we'll go through about 400 to 500 gallons of water and roughly about 60 gallons of recycled motor oil. And before the train cuts me off here, if you guys look either onto the road bed if you're on the right-hand side of the train, or if you're on the left-hand side and you look directly down towards our tracks, here in 1 second you will be able to see those very large sugar pine cones because we'll have the pine tree directly above us, and he'll be dropping his cones on either side of the track. Nature talk for you guys is one of my favorite plants that I've learned about since working here at the railroad. So if you look out on either side of our tracks today, you will notice that the whole forest is covered by this old, thick-growing foliage that is everywhere. Now this plant is called bear clover, though the mountain men at the time called it mountain misery, because when you walk through this plant, it releases an oil which gets into your clothing, takes 4 to 5 washings to get out, and reeks horribly. Though for hundreds of years before these lumberjacks came out here, the Miwok Indians Indians utilized this plant as a medicine. They would collect the leaves of the bear clover plant, boil it in water, agitating those leaves to release the oil, making a form of almost like a tea. They would then drink that tea to cure common aches and pains associated with headaches and body aches. That is because we now know that this bear clover plant is rich in acetylsalicylic acid, which is the main active ingredient in aspirin. So what we have going throughout our whole Sierra National Forest is a natural form of aspirin that we do not see from our pharmaceutical companies. But onto our sugar pine company, which ran the largest and most successful lumber company of its time, employing around 800 men. These men were expected to work 6 days a week with only Sundays off, 12 to 14-hour days every day, with what we would consider nowadays very little to no pay. The unskilled laborer was making a whopping 10 cents an hour, while the skilled laborers, such as mechanics, carpenters, engineers, and conductors, were making 30 cents an hour. But don't worry when you hear that here today, folks. Times have gotten a lot better 100 years later on the railroad. Me, myself, as a conductor today, I'm making closer to 90 cents. Yes, we've raised our pay about 3 times in 100 years. All the lumberjacks out here, they were getting the best, meaning that they were paid by the tree. So the more trees they chop down, the larger paychecks they produced. A good team of lumberjacks out here was able to produce around 80 flat cars of lumber a day. And if you want to get a general idea of what a flat car would look like, these green passenger service cars that we're riding on today are retired lumber cars from the logging industries. We just added the roofs and the benches on them and converted them into passenger service cars. So if you imagine you were working with the lumber company back then, you were filling 80 of these cars a day. You were producing around 10.5 million board feet of lumber a year, and in your combined 31 years in history, did over 1.5 billion board feet of lumber, which would be the equivalent. Excuse me, sir, I do need you to sit down, please. Sorry about that. So that would be the equivalent where if you cut that wood 1 foot wide by 10 feet long, it would be enough lumber to wrap around our world more than 11.5 times. These lumberjacks also utilized a process called clear cutting, meaning they chopped every profitable tree that they could find down with no practice of replanting our forest. So if you imagine you're here 100 years ago riding this train through the forest, you would not see a single large tree standing for over 30,000 acres around us because they had all been fallen. So the trees that you guys are seeing here today are the product of natural reforestation, meaning they were the saplings deemed too small to take that would give us our much larger trees today, or the seeds that finally made it to the forest floor to take roots, which would give us our saplings and our much smaller trees today. Once these trees were fallen and cut up to lengths, they were hauled out of the woods, loaded onto the train, sent to the mill at Sugar Pine for a process known as rough cutting, meaning that they stripped the bark off these logs, cut them down into 2 foot by 12 foot sections. They then loaded those sections onto a horse-drawn wagon and then sent that horse-drawn wagon down to the city of Madera, taking roughly 2.5 days. So, seeing success from other lumber companies from around our nation, the stockholders decided to implement what they called their flume. The flume was a V-shaped wooden trough that was built about 5 feet deep, 3 feet wide, on a gradual decline and filled with water. At the time of its completion, this flume took 2 years to build. It cost $404,000, which would be equivalent to 15+ million today. It stretched 54 miles along the Fresno River and was the largest wooden structure to have ever been built in the world at that time. It also cut their time down from 2.5 days to only 12 hours. Now, this flume was not only meant for taking wood down to the mill. They also rode this flume if they wanted to spend their day down in Madera. So you could simply mosey on over to the mill, grab yourself some boards, strap those boards together to make a raft. You can then load that raft onto the flume as you sit on top, hold on tight, and sail the 54 miles down to the city of Madeira, reaching speeds of 50 miles an hour in some spots because the grades were so steep. Anybody here today that's been to Disneyland or Disney World and has used the long rides in those attraction places? Our fun for the last race inspired by our we can let our guests off the train, stretch your legs, explore the forest, take pictures of the engines. I just ask three things while we're down here, guys. Number one, please do not go too far. Make sure that you can hear that whistle blow and yell out or will all be here for those 10 to 15 minutes. Number two, we are in a federally protected part of our national forest.
10 to 20 minutes.
Anything from here today, be it sticks, rocks, pine cones, lumberjacks, whatever. They have to stay there in the forest. And lastly, I have a curriculum train this afternoon. So if you need to read the train,
rusty wheels hum on a timber spine, through the redwood towers, past the sugar pine. Smoke whispers low, it lingers, it climbs. Ride the narrow gauge, feel the old world roll, where the stories steam and the echo stroll. Tracks through the pines where the heart feels home. The whistle cries like a lonesome dove, wood creaks beneath, it fits like a glove. The past and present, hand in hand, they shove through a forest hymn, through a timeless dream, where the trees keep secrets and the engines gleam. Ride the narrow gauge, feel the old world roll, where the stories steam and the echoes stroll. Tracks through the pines where the heart feels home. The mountains whisper, the rails reply, their song will linger when we say goodbye. The sugar pine shadows stretch toward the sky.
go to bed for the night.
So how do you turn it around up here? Here.
So do you see how she's traveling up this set of tracks right here? So once she gets past, you'll notice that we have a spring switch right there. So we can take her up there, we can throw that switch to realign her to come down this set of tracks.
With the lumber companies to build thousands of water in your van. Those people, more water, more water. He's doing great. It's gonna dislodge that gold from all that material. So you always have to keep it on
clickety-clack, it feels just fine. Sugar pine trees, they wave hello. Whistle blows and off we go. Narrow tracks, narrow track, narrow track, narrow track. Through the hills we're coming back. Sugar pine, sugar pine, sugar pine. Yosemite skies, they're yours and mine. Coal in the fire, steam Steel rails hum on a timber spine. Through the redwoods tall where the shadows shine. Whistles cry like an eagle's call. This old train's seen it all. Narrow tracks through the pines, winding roads of another time, chugging slow where the sunlight falls, taking hearts through the forest halls. Lumber days carve the hillsides bare. Now the echoes ride the mountain air. Steaming stories in the wind tonight, past the ghosts of the sugar pine mine. Every turn whispers the past, every mile it holds me fast. Narrow tracks through the pines, winding roads of another time, chugging slow where the sunlight falls, taking hearts through the forest ash and soot on the engineer's hands, memories buried in these lands. The old train knows, the old